There are a lot of pros to the Rodecaster Pro II, so let's talk about those, along with areas for improvement and what it's been like using the II for just about 2 years. Just like the original Rodecaster, the Rodecaster Pro II, my little friend hanging out over here, has only gotten better since its release due to regular firmware updates. And for the most part, I've loved the Rodecaster Pro II since I've had it, but I've also definitely gone through phases where I did feel a bit frustrated or limited and wanted to explore other options. But the truth is, pretty much every time I use another mixer, I realize how spoiled I am with the Rodecaster Pro II. Now, of course, a lot of that could just come down to my specific needs, preferences, and workflow. There's a ton of variables in there. But even with some of its quirks and some of its issues, I do still think that generally, the Rodecaster Pro II is the best overall 4-channel audio, workstation, streaming, mixer, podcast recorder, interface thingy that's out there. I don't know the correct term for these things because they do more than an interface, more than a mixer, more than a recorder. It's a bunch of things all in one. This is my favorite one of all the all-in-one things. As you might have noticed, this is a very long video, so definitely use chapter markers if there's a part of the review you want to focus on specifically. But if you want to hang out for the whole long duration, I appreciate it. Now, the Rodecaster Pro II can do a lot, and honestly, even after owning it since before launch and using it almost every day, so it's just about 2 years now, there are still some features I'm not super familiar with or that I don't use too often. So it's important to note that this review is based on my personal experience. It's not an objective tech sheet spec breakdown of everything this could possibly do. It's just what I like and don't like about it after using it since it came out. So before diving into more of those specifics, I do think it's important to know who the Rodecaster Pro II is intended for. It can definitely be used in pro environments, and you can regularly see Rodecasters popping up in all kinds of professional settings. But despite that pro name, I do think its main purpose is to help make high-quality audio production more easily available to pretty much anyone who doesn't mind spending a little bit of time learning some of the basics. If you just need to get an XLR mic into your computer and you don't need separate EQ, separate mixing, or recording, then a simple XLR interface will be a much better and more affordable choice, and you really don't need any of the available multi-track Rodecaster-like mixers that are out there. And if you only ever need 1 or 2 XLR mics and not 4, then the Rodecaster Duo is a better choice because the compact size is awesome, and internally, this is every bit as functional as the full-size Rodecaster Pro II. And of course, there are other great smaller options out there too, like the Mackie DLZ Creator XS, which is a direct competitor to the Rodecaster Duo. But for now, I'm talking about the Duo specifically because everything I'm showing and talking about the Rodecaster is the same. So if you like the functionality of the Rodecaster, it's all in this smaller package as well. So with those things in mind, beyond that, the Rodecaster Pro II is a pretty solid choice for just about anyone, keeping in mind that if you are a total beginner, you can definitely expect at least a slight learning curve, and if you are a longtime pro, you might notice and feel some of those limitations. And unfortunately, this might not be music to your ears, but I would not recommend the Rodecaster Pro II for musicians. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. For now, let's focus on some of the pros of the Rodecaster Pro. And let's start with sound quality, which is arguably the most important thing to look at with a device like this. Although I could argue that maybe user interface and usability is equally as important to sound quality because it doesn't matter how good the thing sounds. If it's a total pain to use, you're not going to want to use it. So having something that's user-friendly and delivers great sound quality, powers combined, then that's pretty awesome. And the Rodecaster Pro II does deliver fantastic audio quality, whether it's via USB or recorded internally to the micro SD card or to a connected SSD. At this point, I've used it for hundreds of videos, podcasts, live streams, other projects, and it really is something that I've just come to rely on to do a really good job. And a big part of that is due to the really outstanding preamps in the Rodecaster Pro II that have a whopping 76 decibels of clean gain and are capable of powering pretty much any mic without the need for additional boosters. Right now, as I'm sure you've noticed, I've switched over to the Shure SM7B running at 55 decibels of gain. This is plenty loud, and I still have 21 decibels of headroom if I need it. And I did actually make a whole separate video testing Rode's claim that adding a booster to the Rodecaster Pro II can end up introducing noise to the signal, because that sounds like a lot of marketing hype, but it turns out they're totally right, and it's not hype, and adding boosters is 100% unnecessary with the Rodecaster Pro II. And the really cool part about that is these awesome preamps in the Rodecaster Pro II are exactly the same ones that are in the Rodecaster Duo. They've also made their way into the Rode Streamer X, and if I can get it, they've even made their way into the Rode NT USB Plus. So pretty much everything that needs a preamp since the Rodecaster Pro II has launched has these same preamps in it. And I love that because as soon as you see that, you kind of know what you're getting and you know what it's capable of, and that you kind of don't have to worry about anything when it comes to the type of microphone that you're going to connect to the Rodecaster or something with a Revolution preamp. I guess it was kind of revolutionary. So with that in mind, the fact that you don't need boosters could potentially make this a bit more appealing. If you were planning to use a 4-mic setup with 4 mics that would traditionally need boosters, each booster costing like $50 to $100, maybe even more, that's a pretty huge savings times 4 if you're just using the Rodecaster where you don't need any boosters. And that also gives you the advantage of now removing components from your setup, because not only does that save you money, but it also reduces potential points of failure or other problems. So it makes your setup more affordable and less prone to issues. But as much as I'm like gushing about how much I love these preamps right now, it is worth noting that most new modern interfaces and mixers also have outstanding preamps. So this applies to things like the Mackie DLZ Creators, both the big full-size one, which is giant and over here, and the Creator XS. These have 80 decibels of gain built into them. And even simple XLR interfaces like the 4th gen Focusrite Scarletts all have a ton of clean gain built into them. So pretty much if you see anything that has more than 70 decibels of clean gain, that means you're not going to need to use a booster with any microphone that you connect to it. But getting back to some of the benefits that are a little more specific to the Rodecaster Pro II, it does have some really powerful built-in EQ, effects, and processing. I have personally been super impressed with just the presets that come preloaded, but it's also super easy to tweak those or make your own from scratch and then save them. Like right now I am using the Shure SM7B, but I'm using an SM7B preset that I made. So if I go over here and I turn off the processing, this is what the SM7B sounds like out of the box with no effects and no processing applied. And then if I turn on the SM7B preset for the Rodecaster Pro II, this is the one that it comes with. I really like the way that this sounds. But since everybody's voice is a little bit different, I did go in and tweak a few of the settings, and then I saved that as my own preset right here, SM7B Custom. I can turn that on, and it just tweaks a few of the settings, a little bit of the compressor, a little bit of the EQ to suit my voice and make it sound the way I like when I'm using this microphone in this specific environment. Now, one thing I do wish when it comes to these presets is that there was an easy way to share them, because even though every mic sounds different on every voice, if you have a certain microphone and you find someone else who has that same mic and they've made it sound amazing, I think being able to like start with their preset and then adjust it to your taste and your liking would be really fun and kind of make things maybe easier to get better sound or even be more creative and have fun with things. So if there was just a simple way for me to like take these presets, give them to you, you give me your preset, I put it in here, that would just be so much fun. And I also want to point out that you don't have to match the mic with the mic preset on the Rodecaster Pro II. So even though I was using the SM7B with the SM7B preset, the Rodecaster won't know if it's a different mic. So right now, this is the Earthworks Ethos with no effects and no processing, but I have found that I really like the way that this mic sounds with the SM7B preset. So if I turn that on, now you're hearing me on the Earthworks Ethos with the SM7B preset. So this is a condenser mic with the preset for a dynamic mic. The only thing I had to do was make sure that phantom power was turned on, and then I lowered the gain because by default, the SM7B has a lot more gain than the Ethos needs. And just like with the SM7B, I have found that I like my SM7B custom preset. It's probably like so subtle, you might not even be able to hear the difference. So that means now I'm able to use a preset that I made for a different microphone on this microphone and just get so much more versatility out of what the Rodecaster Pro II is capable of. So hopefully that's at least a little glimpse into why I like the audio quality of the Rodecaster Pro II so much. But you can then take that awesome audio quality and use it for so many different purposes. Now, going back to the original Rodecaster Pro, this was designed specifically for podcasting, and then it sort of evolved via a bunch of different firmware updates over several years to be a lot more versatile as users were trying to use it in different settings like live streams and even live events, things that it was not originally intended for. The Rodecaster Pro II had more of that power and versatility built into it from the start. So while it is great for podcasting, of course, it's also really ideal for streaming. And I think that Rode has made a lot of inroads when it comes to how they handle output mixes and routing. So streamers, or pretty much anyone now, can have a ton of options for creating custom mixes for both channels and headphones, and the unlimited versatility is kind of insane. Basically, you can now create a custom mix for every channel on the Rodecaster Pro II and every headphone output. So all 4 headphones can have an entirely different mix if you want them to. And on top of that, it is super easy to use the Rodecaster Pro II with more than one computer or device at a time, because there are 2 USB outputs up here on the, well, I guess this is the back. It's up for me because mine is on an arm. Did a whole video about how I put it on this arm. But there are 2 USB outputs right here. USB 1 shows up as 2 sources when it's connected to a computer. So that one USB connection will show up as main and chat when it's connected to your computer. But the mix of those 2 sources, main and chat, can be totally customized. So the names kind of don't mean anything. Originally, main was intended to include everything and chat was intended to be a USB mix minus. But now anything can be mix minus, anything can have anything, anywhere, everywhere, all at once. But then you've got USB 2, the second USB output, which will show up as secondary on whatever device it's connected to, and that can also be totally customized. So you have these 3 input-output connections that can be completely customized, and it is possible to connect both of those USB outputs to a single computer, which means you would then have 3 input-output sources for a single Rodecaster Pro II on a single computer. So that means if you're running through multiple apps or something at once, if you're live streaming and you're on Zoom and you're on some other platform or Discord or something, and you want everything to have a totally custom mix going out to it, you can do that by using multiple USB connections. And this crazy level of versatility that applies to almost every aspect of the Rodecaster Pro II is something that I've really come to appreciate. One of my favorite things is the ability to totally change what each of the physical faders does. You can totally map any of the XLR inputs, Bluetooth, USB, smart pads, or pretty much anything can be routed to anything. And as far as I know, unless I mixed up with my mixers, no other mixer has this level of customization. Like right now, you might notice this green XLR cable that's running into the Rodecaster Pro II. It is going into channel 2 because I already have a different cable that's kind of my main routed cable in channel 1, and I didn't want to take that out or mess with it. But down here, I thought it was a little confusing since my brain works from left to right. I thought not having the first channel be the only one I'm using was a little strange. So I just switched. Input 2 is on fader 1, input 1 is on fader 2, and you can just do that with the drag of a button super easily anytime you want. And another thing that's proven itself to me to be a much bigger benefit than I expected is the Rode Central app. Most other mixers don't really have any companion software, and those that do are extremely limited. But Rode Central is pretty awesome as a central location for all of Rode's devices. So that means with the Rodecaster Pro II, you can tweak EQ and processing, you can change settings, you can edit SmartPad functionality directly from there, and it will all reflect on the physical external Rodecaster Pro. So anything you do on the Rode Central app, it was the same as if you were doing it in the Rodecaster itself. And I really like using Rode Central to transfer my recordings. When I'm recording audio for videos like I'm doing right now, I just select the wave option. But when it comes to podcasts, I can just select Buzzsprout since that's my podcast host, and then Rode Central will convert the file to be as compatible as possible with that specific podcasting platform. Now, this isn't something you have to do because most podcasting platforms will take pretty much whatever audio you throw at them, but it is a really nice touch just to help things sound a little bit better and be a little bit more compatible. But when talking about transferring audio, it is worth mentioning, though, that depending on the length of your audio and how much you're changing it or processing it during transfer, it can take a while for a longer file, an hour or more, to transfer over to your computer. Sometimes I've noticed personally, at least on my M1 Mac Mini, base model Mac Mini, something like a 75-minute podcast recording can take upwards of about 10 minutes to transfer over fully. You could, of course, just take the micro SD card out, pop that in your computer, and then transfer the file over without converting it or doing anything like that, and that is significantly faster. But I just mentioned the smart pads, and going back to those, these have been a pretty iconic part of the design of all Rodecasters since the beginning, and now most other mixers, as you've seen, have some version of smart pads, sound pads, multi-function pads as well, and that makes sense because these things are super flexible. It was definitely a smart idea to have these smart pads. Now, of course, they are great for sound clips. That's probably the most common and most basic functionality for them. I did a separate video all about my Rodecaster Pro II based podcast production workflow That's a mouthful. And in that, I was showing it's pretty simple because I just play like intro music and then I fade into audio and I can do interviews. And when I'm done, I just play the outro music and then the podcast is over. But you could put things beyond music clips. You can do sound effects. You can do long interview clips. So if you did an interview for a podcast, you could just push a button, cut to that, and be all set and good to go. And when it comes to setting up sounds on these pads, you can create the sample directly from recording. So I could record right now and make a sample from that, or I could go into Rode Central and load sounds onto the pads, change how they function. And that's a huge benefit over other mixers, because on a lot of other mixers, even though they have sound pads or multifunction pads, setting them up is just a massive pain in the pad. And any sound clips you store on the smart pads are stored internally in the Rodecaster Pro II, so that means you don't need to keep the same memory card or SSD or USB attached to it. And that's a big deal because on a lot of other mixers, the sound clips and stuff that you load in are stored on your external media. So for example, if you format your memory card because it got full of podcast recordings, you will then lose the clips that are on your smart pads. That's not something you have to worry about at all with any of the Rodecasters. And beyond sound clips, the pads can be used for a lot more. They can be used to apply effects or even trigger MIDI functionality, which it's not my area of expertise, but it's a cool thing if you're someone who uses MIDI a lot. Another pretty nifty feature about the Rodecaster Pro II and the Rodecaster Duo is that they have built-in wireless receivers just built into them. So that means you can pair Rode's newer wireless systems directly to them without needing to use the receiver or separate cables or anything. So that means if you have something like this, the Rode Wireless Pro or the Wireless Me or any of the newer systems kind of like this, you can take the transmitter and connect it directly to the Rodecaster Pro II without needing a receiver, and you can connect two transmitters at the same time. Now, I was very frustrated with this at first because this wireless functionality, the receiver had obviously been built into the Rodecaster Pro II since the beginning, but it wasn't until a firmware update about a year after its release that it became functional and was activated. So that means it was in there the whole time, but you couldn't use it really until the Rodecaster Duo came out, and then a big firmware update made it available on both devices at the same time. The reason that frustrated me is because there were so many people who wanted to use their wireless units with the Rodecaster Pro, and you had to find all these weird ways to use cables and adapters, and it was never super reliable, and the sound quality was never quite perfect. And knowing that you could have just directly connected it the whole time, but the thing was just like turned off, was very frustrating. But even though I was frustrated about that, the fact is, it is available now, and that is a very nice feature because I know a lot of people use these wireless units, and it just adds in a lot more versatility to the Rodecaster Pro II. And speaking of all those small things, another thing I want to point out that I like about the Rodecaster Pro II, which might not seem like a big deal, is the power button. So many people hate this power button and have told me they hate this power button, and I get it because it is supremely not satisfying to click this button, or you can't even click it. You just kind of mash it because it's real sort of spongy and squishy and just, it's not satisfying to press at all. But hear me out, because I think the power button is better than you might think. And after using a bunch of other mixers, I've come to appreciate this for, I think, the reason it was intended to feel so funky. The fact that this power button is not easy to press and that you have to press it twice to shut down the Rodecaster Pro means that you won't accidentally turn off the Rodecaster while you're using it. I mention this because other devices like the Mackie DLZ Creators, which I love, they have these really cool, clickable, old school style rocker switches, which feel so much better. But that means, as I mentioned in my review about the DLZ Creator XS, it's so easy to accidentally flip that switch and turn these off while you're using them. And I have done that on more than one occasion because there's no safeguard. Once you flip the switch, the thing is off or on, and that's it. The Rodecaster, the switch is difficult to press, and you have to press it twice, and there's a warning that pops up on screen also to let you confirm that you want to turn things off. So while you're using the Rodecaster or you're recording something, it's basically impossible to accidentally press the power switch and turn it off, which gives you a lot of peace of mind, or at least it gives me a lot of peace of mind. And when it comes to the overall build quality of the Rodecaster Pro II, this is another one of those things that I don't think I fully appreciated until I started using a lot more other mixers. The top panel of the Rodecasters is solid metal, while the body is like a really hard plastic. And most of the other mixers I found, like the Mackies I mentioned, or even I was really surprised that the Boss Gigcaster was very plasticky because Boss is known for like really heavy duty metal heavy metal pedals for guitar and stuff. And I was kind of surprised when I got this, and it's quite plasticky. The Rodecaster is really the most solid multifunction mixer that I've come across. And I didn't appreciate that until I started using a bunch of others, even though all of these also have, awesome things to offer. I'm not saying anything bad about these. I love them all for different reasons, but I always come to appreciate the Rodecaster a little more after I use something else. But while we're talking about build quality, when the Rodecaster Pro II was first released, I had quite a few people message me saying they were having quality control issues with theirs, and I 100% understand why it would make somebody want to return theirs and switch to something else. I will say Rode does have a super solid warranty and really good customer support. So even though it's inconvenient, at least the problem's going to get sorted out if you have like a manufacturing defect with your Rodecaster, I guess any Rode product. Now the good news is I haven't really heard about any of these issues in well over a year at this point. So I'm guessing that means if there was a manufacturing issue, it was addressed, adjusted, and fixed, and now it's not something that we as customers have to worry about. And for me personally, just to clarify, I have not had any of those issues, but because so many people mention them and it's something that I see popping up online a lot, it seemed like something that was important to include in a long-term review. I didn't want to pretend like that didn't exist, even though I haven't experienced it. I know others have, and we're very, very rightfully frustrated by it. But now moving on from the Rodecaster Pro pros, let's concentrate on the Rodecaster's cons. I don't know if I'm totally comfortable putting this as a con, but I'm going to say that maybe the headphone amps are one. The reason I'm kind of on the fence about that is because I like them, but I've heard many people say that they're bothered by headphone latency and find it distracting. Basically, that there's a little tiny delay between what you're hearing and what you're saying, so it sort of messes with your senses and can be distracting. This is another one of those instances where I don't personally have any issues, and I find the headphone amps to be super clear and super quiet. The original Rodecaster Pro had very noisy amps, and you'd hear a lot of static, and you weren't sure if it was going to be on the recording or not. It usually wasn't, but it was hard to tell while you're monitoring. With the Rodecaster Pro II and the Rodecaster Duo, what I hear is what I get. I even used my Rodecaster Pro II for a 5-month online electric bass course, and I had no issues listening and playing along in time with lessons and stuff like that. So to me, that felt like there was no latency issue because it wasn't distracting, and I was able to use it for a music-related purpose, which is where latency issues really become glaring problems if they exist. But after talking with lots of people about this for almost 2 years now, I think my conclusion is that some people are more sensitive to minor latency than others. And I think I'm just someone who's less sensitive to it because I don't want to look at what a bunch of people are saying, we're having latency problems, and then just say, no, it doesn't exist. All of those people can't be totally wrong, but I haven't had that problem on my Rodecaster Pro II or my Duo, and these were made a year apart, so I don't think it was like I happened to get lucky with one specific unit that didn't have a problem and everyone else got ones that had problems. I think it just depends on your specific brain and how sensitive it is to these things. But with that in mind, I will point out that in my experience, the headphone amps on the Mackie DLZ Creators do sound clearer to me. And part of me wonders if the reason they sound clearer is because there is less latency. I guess if there was a slight latency, this might sound a little less clear and this might sound more crisp. I don't know. I'm thinking that these have better headphone amps in them, but I'm not 100% sure. Or Rode. Now also, even though I did just say that I use the Rodecaster Pro II for an online music course, it's very important for me to say that I think that music is by far the Rodecaster's biggest weakness. It can take a clean signal from an instrument with no problem, but if you want to do anything like add effects or virtual amp modeling, or even just have something as rudimentary as an on-screen digital tuner, there are literally zero options. Of course, you could take that clean instrument signal and run it through a DAW of your choice, but then you are going to introduce latency issues because you're going to be having to monitor from your computer after it's run through the processing, and playing music with latency problems is kind of something that's just honestly not really possible or practical at all. In fact, the only podcast-style mixer interface that I have found that's really designed for music is the Boss Gigcaster, and this thing is not just good for music, it's phenomenal. Like nothing else even comes close. You can model hundreds of amps and effects with absolutely no latency, and it all sounds really incredible. And you can turn the smart pads into effects pedals. I need to make a video about how good this is for music. And I think the reason for that is pretty simple, and that's because Boss and Roland, the parent company, have decades of experience with digital instrument modeling, and they have a massive library of amps and effects and all these things that they can just immediately take and incorporate into a new product. As far as I know, I don't think Rode has anything like that, so even though the Rodecaster Pro II, in terms of processing power, is more than capable of handling that kind of workload, I think that means Rode would either have to create a bunch of new things like virtual amps and effects from scratch, or they would have to somehow license a library of existing ones or like acquire another company or something. And I don't know if that's something that they're interested in doing or capable of doing, or if it's practical at all. I don't know if this is the reason or not, but the end result of this is that the Rodecaster Pro II is really not great for musicians. And unfortunately, the Gigcaster isn't nearly as polished as the Rodecaster when it comes to podcasting and streaming applications. So I would actually only recommend this when music is your main focus, because otherwise it's going to get very frustrating very quickly. And it's unfortunate that there's not one device to rule them all that does everything perfectly, but Gigcaster for music, Rodecaster or DLZ creators for podcasts and streaming. But going back to the headphone amps for a minute, the other issue I've had with the Rodecaster Pro II is this weird intermittent clicking in my headphones when I'm monitoring audio. And I've heard other people say that they have this problem too, so I know it's not just me being crazy in this case. I just can't figure out the cause because there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. Basically, it just sounds like there's a little like kind of in my headphones every once in a while, randomly while I'm recording. And I've finally learned after a long time to just trust that it will not appear in the output or the recording, but it is definitely distracting when you hear it in your headphones while you're recording. Someone suggested to me that it could be due to other electrical devices in the same location turning on and off, especially something big. So like if a refrigerator or an air conditioner compressor kicks in, it could maybe cause that click. I don't know if that's the case or not, but I do know that none of my other mixers, the Mackeys or the Boss or even the original Rodecaster, have this problem, but both the Rodecaster Pro II and the Rodecaster Duo, which again were manufactured more than a year apart from each other, have the same issue. It's not a deal breaker, it's just something that is a bit frustrating and annoying. And another thing that's a bit frustrating and annoying, as much as I just stood up for the power button, the Mushy power button over here, I don't have mushy feelings about the USB power connection because I really wish that the Rodecaster Pro II and all of Rode's newer devices had locking power connectors. They all have USB power connectors, and the problem with that is it's very easy to accidentally disconnect this or bend it and break it and kind of mess it up. There is a little rubber thingy on the cable that can help lock it into the back of the Rodecaster Pro II, but it's nowhere near as secure as a regular barrel lock like on the original Rodecaster Pro or on the Mackie mixers, and even when that little plastic thing is connected, it still allows for the connector itself to get bumped, bent, or disconnected totally. But even with all of those cons in mind, let's move on to the conclusion here. I can't wait to get to it. I've used, like I said, just about every podcast streaming mixer since the original Rodecaster Pro. In addition to the Rodecaster Pro II and the Duo, I've also used the Zoom PodTrack P8, the PodTrack P4, the Tascam Mixcast 4, the Mackie DLZ Creator, and the DLZ Creator XS. That's an excessive number of mixers to have used. And the truth is, there really are a lot of great options out there. The Mackie DLZ line, I'm going to hold up the small one because it's the easier one to hold up. The Mackie DLZ line is the one that I'm most impressed with, and it has some really awesome features that you just can't find anywhere else, including in the Rodecaster Pro. But overall, for me at least, there's definitely a reason why the Rodecaster Pro II has been a permanent part of my setup since the day I got it. Even during those times when I felt a little frustrated or annoyed with it, or there was a bug that needed to be fixed with a firmware update or something, and I tried to consider incorporating another option as a permanent choice, I kind of always just end up coming back to the Rodecaster. And as somebody who bounces back and forth between making videos, podcasts, live streams, video calls, virtual meetings, the Rodecaster Pro can adapt to and handle pretty much anything I throw at it. So no matter what the workflow is or the needs are, I know that this thing will be able to work with it. And as I said before, really the biggest weakness with the Rodecaster Pro is music, but for me, since I'm not anywhere near a pro musician and that's not the main thing I do, I actually ended up just getting a totally separate specialized pedal board to use with my guitar and bass. And this is So much better than even the Gigcaster could be. But if you're not a musician and you're not doing a music first workflow, then the Rodecaster Pro II is definitely something worth considering. And compared to all those other mixers, I just find the Rodecasters to be the most practical, the most user-friendly, and to have the broadest set of features and capabilities that have a lot to offer just about anyone. And speaking of things that have a lot to offer, thank you to everyone who helped support my channel through Patreon and YouTube channel memberships. And if you made it this far in this super long video, thanks for sticking around to the end. I really appreciate it.